I am Amara Lewis, and I am 32 years old. For most of my life, I have lived with a secret that shaped every decision I made, every fear I carried, and every silence I learned to master. This is not a story I ever imagined telling out loud. It is a story I buried so deeply that sometimes I almost convinced myself it belonged to someone else. But silence has a cost, and I have paid it for too long. Before I continue, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this survive because people listen, because silence finally meets understanding, and because someone out there realizes they are not alone. I grew up in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood where everything looked normal from the outside. White fences, trimmed hedges, polite neighbors who waved every morning. My father, Daniel Lewis, was respected. He worked in logistics, wore neatly pressed shirts, and spoke calmly in public. People trusted him. Mothers asked him for advice. Pastors shook his hand. Teachers praised him for being involved. No one ever questioned him. And that, I later learned, was part of the danger. My mother, Ruth Lewis, was gentle and tired in a way I didn't understand until I became an adult. She cooked, cleaned, prayed, and tried to keep peace in a house that always felt like it was holding its breath. I was the oldest child. Responsible. Quiet. The one expected to understand without explanation. When I turned 13, I was already helping with my younger siblings, already praised for being mature for my age. That phrase would come back to haunt me. The first time something felt wrong, I didn't have the language to name it. I only knew that my stomach tightened when my father stood too close. That his voice changed when my mother wasn't around. That the air in certain rooms felt heavier when it was just the two of us. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself good daughters didn't think bad thoughts about their fathers. I told myself fear was a sign of weakness. At 13, you trust the adults who raised you. You believe the rules of the world are fixed and fair. You believe that home is safe because everyone tells you it is. When that belief breaks, it doesn't shatter loudly. It cracks quietly, piece by piece, until you learn to live around the broken edges. He started by crossing lines that were easy to excuse. Lingering touches. Inappropriate comments disguised as jokes. Questions that made my skin crawl, but sounded harmless enough to anyone else. When I pulled away, he laughed and said I was too sensitive. When I froze, he said I was growing up and needed to stop acting like a child. Confusion became my constant companion. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother. Not my friends. Not my teachers. Shame wrapped itself around me like a second skin. I worried that if I spoke, no one would believe me. Worse, I worried they would and blame me. I had seen how people talked about girls. How quickly responsibility shifted. How easily men were excused. Silence felt safer than being destroyed twice. Years passed, and the abuse became a shadow that followed me everywhere. I learned how to disappear while still being present. I learned how to smile without feeling. I learned how to keep secrets so well that even I forgot how heavy they were. At school, I performed. Good grades. Good behavior. Good daughter. Inside, I was exhausted beyond words. By the time I left for college, I thought distance would save me. New city. New routines. New name among strangers. I believed that once I was physically away, the past would loosen its grip. But trauma doesn't understand geography. It moves with you. It settles into your bones. It waits. I met Ethan Miller when I was 24. He was calm, kind, and patient in ways I wasn't used to. He listened without interrupting. He never raised his voice. When I flinched at sudden movements, he noticed, but didn't push. For the first time, I felt something close to safety. It terrified me. We dated slowly. I kept parts of myself locked away, afraid that if he knew everything, he would leave. When he proposed, I cried. Not just from happiness, but from grief for the girl I had been and the years I couldn't get back. Still, I believed marriage could be a new chapter. A clean break. A life where my father no longer had access to me. I was wrong. When my father heard I was married, his tone changed. He congratulated me too eagerly. Asked too many questions. Wanted to visit. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself he was just a father checking on his daughter. I told myself I was an adult now, with boundaries and a husband who loved me. I told myself I was safe. The day he arrived, my hands shook as I set the table. Ethan noticed and asked if I was okay. I lied automatically. Just nervous, I said. It's been a while. He smiled and squeezed my hand. That simple gesture almost made me cry. The visit started normally. Small talk. Polite laughter. stories about work and traffic. My father played his role perfectly. Warm, proud, harmless. If someone had walked in, they would have seen nothing wrong. That was always his greatest skill, looking innocent. Later that evening, Ethan stepped out to pick up a few things from the store. I remember the sound of the door closing, the sudden quiet, the way my chest tightened before anything even happened, like my body knew before my mind could catch up. My father stood too close again. Time slowed. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He spoke softly, as if we were sharing a private joke. He reminded me of the past in a way that made my stomach turn. He acted as if nothing had changed. As if my marriage didn't matter. As if my voice didn't matter. Something inside me snapped, not loudly but firmly. No, I said. The word felt unfamiliar on my tongue. I had never said it to him before. My voice shook, but it was real. I can't, I continued. This stops. I won't continue. For a moment, he looked surprised. Then irritated. Then angry. He tried to intimidate me the way he always had, lowering his voice, stepping closer, reminding me of my place. But I wasn't 13 anymore. I wasn't trapped. I wasn't alone. When he tried to force the moment, fear surged, but so did something stronger. Survival. I stepped back. I raised my voice. I told him to leave me alone. And then the front door opened. Ethan walked in. The room froze. I will never forget the look on my husband's face as he took in the scene. Confusion turned to shock. Shock turned to rage. Not wild rage, but controlled, devastating clarity. He didn't need an explanation right away. He could see it in my posture, my tears, my father's panic. What is going on? Ethan asked. My father stammered. Tried to laugh it off. Tried to explain. Tried to lie. But lies collapse when the truth finally has witnesses. I broke. Years of silence poured out of me in broken sentences and shaking breaths. I told Ethan everything, about being 13, about the fear, about the years of manipulation. I expected disbelief. I expected questions. I expected blame. Instead, Ethan stood between us. Get out, he said to my father, his voice steady and final. Leave now, and don't ever come near my wife again. My father protested, begged, threatened, but Ethan didn't move. He didn't shout. He didn't argue. He protected me in a way no one ever had. That night changed everything. By morning, my father was cut off completely. No calls. No visits. No access. Ethan documented everything. Changed locks. Alerted people who needed to know. My safety became non-negotiable. For the first time in my life, my father had no power over me. But power doesn't disappear quietly. In the days that followed, messages began to arrive. Apologies. Excuses. Tears. He begged. He claimed remorse. He said he was old and lonely and misunderstood. He asked for forgiveness he had never earned. I didn't respond. Because some doors are not meant to be reopened. And some silences are not weakness, they are boundaries. This was only the beginning. The morning after everything collapsed, the house felt unfamiliar. Same walls. Same furniture. Same quiet hum of the refrigerator. But the air had changed. It felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because the secret was no longer trapped inside me. Heavier because truth carries weight. Sleep had not come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, memories surfaced without warning. Moments I had buried resurfaced with sharp clarity, as if my mind finally felt safe enough to release them. My body was exhausted, but my thoughts refused to rest. Ethan barely slept either. He stayed close, never crowding me, never asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. When morning light filtered through the curtains, he made coffee and sat across from me at the kitchen table, his hands folded, his expression serious but gentle. You don't owe me anything, he said quietly. But I need you to know something. None of this was your fault. Not then. Not now. Not ever. Those words broke something open inside me. I had rehearsed 1,000 defenses over the years, prepared for disbelief or doubt. I had never prepared for unconditional belief. The days that followed were a blur of emotions. Relief. Anger. Grief. Shame. Rage. Sometimes all at once. Trauma doesn't leave politely. It demands to be felt. I cried over things I didn't know I was allowed to mourn. My childhood. My sense of safety. The father I thought I had. Ethan encouraged me to speak to a therapist, not as a command but as an option. You've been carrying this alone for too long, he said. You don't have to anymore. Walking into that therapist's office for the first time felt like stepping onto unfamiliar ground. My voice shook as I spoke. Some sentences came out tangled. Some memories refused to form words at all. But session by session, I learned something new. Silence had protected me once, but now it was holding me back. While I was learning how to breathe again, my father was unraveling. The messages started cautiously at first. Long texts filled with apologies that never quite named what he had done. He framed himself as confused, as weak, as a man who had made mistakes. He said he loved me. He said he didn't know why he behaved the way he did. He said he was praying. I blocked his number. Then came emails. Then letters sent to my mother's house. Each one carried the same tone, regret without accountability. Sorrow without responsibility. He begged to talk. To explain. To be forgiven. Forgiveness, I learned, is often demanded by those who refuse to change. My mother called me 2 weeks later. Her voice sounded different, smaller somehow. She asked if we could talk. I agreed cautiously. We met in a quiet cafe halfway between our homes. She looked older than I remembered, her hands trembling slightly as she stirred her tea. She didn't ask if the story was true. She said, "Why didn't you tell me?" The question cut deeper than I expected. Years of fear rushed to the surface. I told her the truth, that I didn't think she would believe me, that I was afraid of tearing the family apart, that I had been a child who didn't know how to name what was happening. Tears slid down her face. She apologized again and again for not seeing, for not protecting me. I wanted to comfort her, but something inside me resisted. Her pain was real, but so was the fact that I had survived without her help. She told me she had confronted my father after Ethan demanded no contact. He had denied everything at first, then minimized, then cried, then blamed stress, loneliness, temptation. Hearing that made my stomach turn. "I asked him to leave," she said quietly. "He's staying with his brother now." I nodded. I didn't feel relief. I felt distance. Some bridges collapsed beyond repair. Word spread through the family faster than I expected. Aunts called. Cousins texted. Some offered support. Others asked uncomfortable questions. A few suggested forgiveness for the sake of peace. Those were the calls I ended quickly. Peace built on silence is not peace. It's captivity. Ethan stood firm through it all. He handled practical things I couldn't. Changing numbers, installing security cameras, setting clear boundaries with anyone who tried to push past them. When I doubted myself, he reminded me of the facts. When guilt crept in, he reminded me of the child I had been. "He lost his right to be called your father," Ethan said one evening as we sat on the couch, my head resting on his shoulder. "You didn't lose anything." He did. Therapy peeled back layers I didn't know existed. I learned how grooming works, how abusers manipulate trust, how children internalize blame because it feels safer than admitting adults failed them. For the first time, my reactions made sense. My fear had logic. My silence had context. Still, healing was not linear. Some days I felt strong, grounded, clear, confident in my choices. Other days, a sound, a smell, or a memory sent me spiraling. On those days, I learned to ask for help. I learned that strength didn't mean endurance alone. It meant connection. 3 months after everything came out, my father tried one last approach. He showed up at our gate. I wasn't home, but the security camera captured everything. He stood there for nearly 20 minutes, pressing the bell, pacing, wiping his face as if rehearsing a performance. When Ethan saw the footage, his jaw tightened. He didn't open the gate. Instead, he contacted a lawyer. A formal cease and desist letter was sent. Any further attempts at contact would result in legal consequences. Clear. Documented. Final. That night, as Ethan held me while I cried, I realized something important. I was no longer reacting. I was choosing. And choice is power. My father's begging continued through intermediaries. Family members relayed messages I didn't ask for. "He's not doing well. He says he's changed. He's sorry. Sorry didn't undo the years. Sorry didn't protect a 13-year-old girl. Sorry didn't deserve access to my life." I stopped engaging entirely. As months passed, my body slowly learned that the danger was over. I slept better. I laughed more. I felt present in my own marriage. For the first time, intimacy didn't feel like something I had to survive. Still, grief lingered. Not for him, but for the version of myself that never got a choice. One afternoon, during therapy, my counselor asked, "What would justice look like to you?" I thought about it for a long time. Justice wasn't prison or public exposure. Justice was freedom. Justice was safety. Justice was waking up without fear. Justice was knowing that the cycle ended with me. I chose that. My relationship with my mother remains complicated. We speak occasionally. There are moments of honesty, moments of distance. Healing doesn't demand reconciliation. It demands truth. Some family members drifted away when I refused to soften my story to make others comfortable. I let them go. Anyone who needed my silence more than my survival was never truly on my side. What surprised me most was how many people quietly reached out after hearing parts of my story. Friends, colleagues, even strangers. They didn't always share details, but their words carried familiarity. Something similar happened to me. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for saying it out loud. That's when I understood the real danger of silence. It isolates. It convinces survivors they are alone when they are not. My father remains removed from my life completely. No holidays. No milestones. No updates. No access. The begging eventually faded into absence. And that absence felt like peace. I don't know what consequences he lives with now. I no longer wonder. Accountability doesn't require my attention. What matters is this. The 13-year-old girl who learned to survive has grown into a woman who knows how to protect herself. Time has a strange way of revealing what truly matters. As the months turned into a year, life didn't magically become easy, but it became honest. I stopped measuring my healing by how little I thought about the past and started measuring it by how fully I lived in the present. There were still difficult days. Certain anniversaries hit harder than expected. A familiar street. A random smell. A phrase spoken in a tone too close to memory. Trauma doesn't vanish, it transforms. But I was no longer powerless against it. Ethan and I made intentional choices about how we lived. We moved to a new home, not because the old one was unsafe, but because we wanted a space untouched by fear. Somewhere that felt like a beginning instead of a recovery room. The first night there, surrounded by unpacked boxes and bare walls, we sat on the floor and laughed like children. That laughter felt earned. Trust, once broken so early in life, takes patience to rebuild. I had learned to be alert instead of open, cautious instead of curious. But with time and consistent kindness, I learned that safety could exist without conditions. Ethan never rushed me, never questioned my boundaries, never asked me to get over it. He understood that healing is not something you finish, it's something you practice. Therapy shifted from survival to reconstruction. We talked about identity, about self-worth, about separating who I was from what had been done to me. For years, my life had been shaped by reaction. Now, I was learning how to choose. One of the hardest lessons was letting go of the fantasy of closure. There would be no moment where my father suddenly understood the depth of his actions and offered genuine accountability. There would be no apology that healed the past. And that was okay. Closure did not require his participation. What surprised me was how much anger I still carried. Not explosive, but steady. Anger at systems that protect abusers. At cultures that prioritize reputation over children. At the way survivors are expected to be graceful, forgiving, and quiet. I allowed myself to feel that anger without guilt. Anger, when acknowledged, can be clarifying. It showed me what I valued. It showed me where my boundaries lived. Eventually, I chose to tell my story more openly. Not to everyone, not all at once, but intentionally. First to a close friend. Then to a support group. Each time I spoke, the weight shifted. Shame loses its power when exposed to light. The responses were never what I expected. Some people cried. Some listened in stunned silence. Some thanked me for trusting them. A few revealed their own stories, whispered like confessions they had been waiting years to release. In those moments, I understood something deeply. Abuse thrives in isolation, but healing multiplies in community. My relationship with my mother slowly evolved. She remained married to the truth rather than denial, and that mattered. There were conversations we could never fully have, wounds that could never fully close. But there was effort, accountability, respect for boundaries. That was enough. She never asked me to forgive him. That alone changed everything. As for my father, he remained absent. Occasionally, someone would mention him in passing, where he was living, how he looked older, how he spoke of regret. I listened without curiosity. His life no longer intersected with mine. That separation felt permanent, and for the first time, permanent didn't feel threatening. One evening, while journaling, I wrote a sentence that stopped me cold. He no longer gets to define my story. I stared at it for a long time. For years, my identity had been shaped by secrecy, by endurance, by survival. Now it was shaped by truth, by boundaries, by choice. I was no longer just someone who survived abuse. I was someone who reclaimed her life. Ethan and I began talking about the future with excitement instead of caution. Plans no longer came with mental escape routes. Joy no longer felt borrowed. I learned to occupy my own happiness fully, without apology. There were moments of grief for the childhood I never had. That grief still visits sometimes, but it no longer consumes me. I honor it, then let it pass. The greatest victory wasn't cutting my father off. It was choosing myself, choosing safety, choosing honesty, choosing peace without compromise. If someone had told 13-year-old me that this life was possible, I wouldn't have believed them. I thought survival was the end goal. I didn't know fulfillment could come after. But it can, and it does. Today, I live without fear of being found, confronted, or controlled. I live in a body that no longer flinches at kindness. I live with a partner who sees me not as damaged, but as resilient. Most importantly, I live knowing that the cycle ended with me. And if you are listening to this and carrying a secret that feels too heavy to speak, know this: you are not weak for surviving. You are not broken for taking time. And you are not alone, even when it feels like you are. Silence may protect for a season, but truth is what sets you free. And before this story closes, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your voice matters, your presence matters, and somewhere, someone needs to know they're not alone, just like I once did.